I'm excited to be reviewing the results of the Evolution of Mobility Path to Electric Vehicle Adoption study. For the study, we spoke to two key target groups, a mix of consumers who were owners, considerers, and non-considerers of electric vehicles. For the purposes of this research, we specifically talked about battery electric vehicles, given the fact that many consumers consider plug-in hybrids and hybrid electric vehicles to be very close relatives of gas-powered vehicles. I'll also be using the terminology ICE to represent internal combustion engine vehicles, interchangeably with gas-powered. We also talked to dealers, franchise dealers, who are single or group franchise dealers that currently sell electric vehicles in the marketplace today. By capturing both of their inputs, we're able to juxtapose the insights that we gather on their perspectives of the barriers to electric vehicle adoption, as well as their expectations against the reality of the U.S. market today, understand their dealership experience during their purchase journey, and also understand key areas where dealers need additional support to advance EV adoption. As you'll see on slide 3, we know from our Kelley Blue Book Brand Watch that overall consideration and awareness of EVs coming in the near future has remained relatively stagnant since 2016, with 70% of consumers saying that they expect it to come in the next 5 years. However, this is not converting to vehicle consideration. When we look at overall consideration for electric vehicles, it has remained relatively flat when we remove Tesla from this consideration set. However, Tesla continues to lead the pack in EV brand awareness. They've done a wonderful job as presenting themselves as the innovative leader with electric vehicles, and therefore this is translating to high awareness among consumers. The next closest in this OEM measurement is Toyota. Toyota has definitely had a halo effect with the Prius being considered an EV brand among consumers. Without Tesla, the EV market share has remained relatively stagnant. Yet, when we look at the manufacturer's announcements of the new models being ready to be introduced to the marketplace, we see that almost 100 electrified models are coming soon. Now to dive into the research. The first piece of insights that we see is that we need to clean up misconceptions on the cost and range associated with electric vehicles. What this really means is that we continue to see the top 2 barriers for non-considerers of electric are cost and the charging or battery infrastructure. When we talk about cost, initially we look at the initial cost for consumers, and we see that both for considerers and non-considerers, this remains the top objection. They see that 8 out of 10 feel like an EV is going to cost more than a gas-powered vehicle. However, when we look at comparing similar segment vehicles, such as the Nissan Leaf, Nissan Maxima, and Nissan Sentra, what we find is that affordability is actually within reach when we look at average transaction prices over the past 7 years. Nissan Leaf has actually decreased in average transaction prices, largely in part to improvements in lithium-ion battery costs. Nissan Maxima has increased by 7.5%, and the Nissan Sentra has increased by 3.1%. This affordability gap, as it closes, is one of the key areas of education opportunity for both dealers and OEMs to help consumers understand what is really a valid option for them in their consideration set, since we know that price is one of the top drivers among in-market shoppers. A majority of considerers perceive cost of ownership to actually be less for EVs. So when we take ownership costs into account, almost 100% of consumers consider the cost of an EV when they're thinking about the vehicle. And then 65% of considerers think that it will cost less to charge an EV than a gas-powered vehicle, and 54% think it will cost less to maintain a gas vehicle. As someone who's been studying this for a while, we would actually expect that these percentages to be higher, so this shows a huge opportunity to grow understanding of initial cost both for charging and maintenance of electric vehicles. When we look at 5-year cost to operate savings, we see that it's a positive story for EV consumers. The average consumer saves 58% on an EV versus an ICE vehicle when we factor in things such as license, registration, state sales tax, and federal tax credits, maintenance, repairs, and other components of ownership and operation. One piece that is not included in this calculation today is depreciation. As an industry, we continue to try to understand the true depreciation of a lithium-ion battery and what that residual value means when the vehicle comes back into market in its second life. Average fuel savings when we compare gas versus electric is 60% over a 5-year span for a consumer, and average service cost savings is roughly 25%, or translating to roughly $100 per year. The cost associated with battery replacement, though, continues to be a concern for many consumers, given the fact that they are not sure what the true lifespan of a lithium-ion battery is. When we ask owners and considerers, both agree that they feel like a lithium-ion battery for an automotive vehicle has roughly a lifespan of about 7 years. One way that manufacturers have started to try to combat this concern of lifespan is warranty programs for electric batteries. Specifically, federal regulations now mandate that OEMs offer a minimum of 8-year or 100,000-mile warranty on all electric vehicle batteries. Interestingly enough, Hyundai now offers a lifetime coverage of its battery for the Hyundai Kona. One other component that I mentioned before in terms of average transaction price is the decreasing cost of the average battery pack. We saw from 2010 to 2016 a 77% decrease in cost per kilowatt for battery packs, and we anticipate an additional decrease of 45% in the next 2 years. However, with these decreasing costs, there is still an opportunity to educate consumers. We find that 52% of EV owners surveyed purchased an extended battery warranty for their vehicle. This percentage is slightly higher for non-luxury dealers who found that their customers were purchasing warranties for their batteries. One additional component of battery life is range anxiety, something that we've heard about from the inception of electric vehicles in the U.S. marketplace. When we talk to considerers, they consider the minimum acceptable range to be 184 miles on average. They estimate that most vehicles in the marketplace today can go 240 miles without charge, but their ultimate desired range is 300 miles, which is more in line with the range for ICE vehicles in market today. However, range is definitely becoming less of a concern. As improvements and innovation in lithium-ion batteries increase, we're seeing that larger ranges are being developed by both existing and new automakers in the electric vehicle space. On slide 16, you'll actually see a sampling of what some of those ranges are. This is not a full list, but rather what is publicly available and then vetted through EPA testing. On slide 17, we'll begin the discussion of the biggest priority for electric vehicles. While range is fine, infrastructure is a huge priority, not just for the industry, but also for Cox Automotive mobility. There's a clear need for more charging stations when we talk to considerers. The two key areas where considerers would consider charging their vehicles are both at home and around their work. Right now, 7 out of 10 say that there are too few charging areas near their home, and 6 out of 10 would say there's too few charging areas where they work, identifying an opportunity to increase public charging infrastructure for the future growth of mobility. One of the things that we tested with this research is understanding new models for charging. One of those was mobile battery charging service that comes to your location, similar to that of AAA bringing gas to gas-powered vehicles. This had a very high interest response rate among both owners and considerers of electric vehicles. A second concept that we tested was robotic charging stations where a robot locates your vehicle, plugs it in, and charges it with no human interaction whatsoever. This again had a very high response rate, with 3/4 of consumers saying that they would be interested in this concept. We're already seeing this concept tested today in countries like Korea, who are leading some of the evolution of electric vehicle infrastructure. And on slide 20, we're going to begin talking about one of the most interesting components of this study, the barriers that dealers are having to overcome in order to translate EV interest into EV sales. Dealers really aren't selling that many EVs today. When we talk to dealers about what is their perception of their current EV sales, they say that on average, roughly 5% of their vehicles sold per month are electric vehicles. We know in reality, when we look at new vehicle retail sales, this is actually slightly less than 3% of total new retail sales volume in the U.S. today. Similarly, we see that dealers feel like roughly 9% of their CPO vehicles sold per month are electric and 4% are non-CPO vehicles. But why is it that dealers aren't selling that many vehicles today? Well, initially, they're not convinced that much is going to change in the marketplace, and they're not feeling a large sense of urgency from their manufacturers. In fact, only 9% on slide 22 indicate that dealers indicate that they feel like they're getting high pressure from their manufacturers to hit EV sales targets. And when we look at expectations for sales to increase in the next 1 to 2 years, less than 50% of dealers indicate that they think it's going to grow. However, this is slightly higher for luxury dealers, with 64% indicating they anticipate a growth in EV sales. Lack of urgency can also be attributed to the margin compression that we're overall seeing in the marketplace. 54% of dealers say that they see lower ROI for sales of electric vehicles compared to gas-powered vehicles. They feel like they are more likely to sell gas in the future, and they agree that they feel like EVs hurt gas sales. When we look at their interactions with consumers at the dealership, we find that the barriers are very aligned. Dealers find objections most with cost and charging battery infrastructure, similar to what we talked about in the previous section. Also, EVs are just more complicated to sell for dealerships. Right here on slide 25, you'll see the top 4 areas where OEMs can assist dealerships the most in converting EV sales. The first being a lack of inventory. Not only is there low volumes of inventory in the marketplace today for electric vehicles, but there's limited diversity in makes, models, and even vehicle segments. The second is not enough charging stations. This is both for charging stations at the dealer to maintain the current inventory that they have, but also in order to convince consumers that there's sufficient infrastructure in their area. At 33%, many cite lack of OEM support, which ultimately translates to incentives, marketing materials, and the fourth stat that you will see here, EV sales training for their staff. So when we look at the research, what we find is that the right alignment is really key in the success of overall EV proliferation in the U.S. market. This means an alignment of consumers, dealers, and OEMs to continue an open dialogue, increased education, and more tools to better understand the advantages of electric vehicles over gas-powered vehicles. More OEM support ultimately generates more EV sales for dealers and the OEM. On slide 29, you'll see that dealerships are actually underestimating the influence that they have on electric vehicle sales. What they find is that they say less often than consumers that they are the ones who ultimately convert that sale to an electric vehicle, where in fact 74% of owners say that it was the dealer or the salesperson that ultimately convinced them to purchase an EV vehicle. On the right-hand side of slide 29, you'll see a couple of the different conversation topics that salespeople can have to successfully sell through an electric vehicle to consumer. That's understanding the detailed cost comparison versus gas, knowing how to operate the electric vehicle overall, how to take care of the vehicle from a maintenance standpoint, a map of charging stations in their area, and arranging a charging station to be installed at their home. But dealers still feel like they're not experiencing enough OEM support in order to do this. In fact, 56% say that they're receiving some to no OEM sales and marketing support in order to help with this sales conversation. And even among those dealers who say that they feel like they're receiving sufficient support, only 32% say that it's very helpful. On slide 31, you'll see a detailed overview of all of the areas that OEMs could provide additional support. This breaks down to consumer education, charging support, training for both sales and technicians, and marketing. The biggest takeaway from here is the fact that it really has to be a top-down approach from manufacturers in terms of supplying the right type of marketing messages on a broad level to help lay the initial foundation, and then having the right types of tools online and within the dealership to help educate consumers, whether this be calculators or side-by-side comparisons. And then ultimately, when it comes to the final sale, they have to be able to help support the charging infrastructure in terms of installing charging stations at the dealership, recommending charging locator apps so that it's easy for consumers on the go to know where they can go and charge their car, and even arranging the install within the home, since we know that home is the number one place that consumers are charging their cars today. And ultimately, when we have this right alignment from this research, what we found is that we see a higher sell-through rate. In fact, 88% of more EVs are sold among high-support dealers than those dealers who say they're receiving lower support from their manufacturers today. So going back through the results, I'm going to talk through the top 4 things that we found from this research. The first being that cost and battery remain the biggest consumer and dealer barriers as it relates to EV adoption. Secondly, public charging infrastructure is critical for further EV proliferation in the U.S. Third, dealers do not feel a sense of urgency to sell EV due to lack of inventory levels, low perceived profits, and ultimately low or limited OEM support today. And finally, dealers need more education, marketing, and sales support from their automakers to ensure preparedness to sell and service the EVs of the future. With that, I'm going to transition the conversation to Michelle Krebs and Zoe Rahim for commentary on these results.
Thank you, Rachel. I would just quickly add that obviously the situation in Europe and China, where governments are regulating emissions that are going to require EV proliferation, is very different from the situation in the U.S., where at the moment there isn't any big federal regulatory push for EVs, and frankly the state situation is in turmoil, specifically California and states that follow. So there's not the sense of urgency yet, and it's not coming. There's no sense of urgency coming from governments. However, EVs are going to be in increasing numbers in showrooms, and so achieving EV adoption in the U.S. will require all hands on deck to educate consumers, and that ultimately starts with the automakers and filters down to the dealers. So?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. So as you've heard from Rachel and Michelle, as the market intensifies its attention on the rise of electric vehicles, one thing we're also focusing on is used electric vehicles. Increasing new EV sales just means increasing used EV supply. So far, the used EV market has been relatively non-existent, but that's ripe for change. To examine EVs in the remarketing space, we're studying both supply and pricing trends to learn about how these vehicles behave in the wholesale and used market. We hope to share in the near future deeper views of our Manheim Used Vehicle Value Index, such as EV price dynamics in the wholesale market, so be on the lookout for that.